Financial misinformation is rampant and it could be hurting your credit scores. Given the nature of my job, I hear a lot of financial advice, and while there's a lot of good financial advice to be had, there's also lots of bad financial advice out there. NerdWallet surveyed 2,000 American adults in August 2022 to find out what people believed about credit scores, and it turns out there's a lot of things people believe that quite simply are not true. Let me tell you 3 common credit score myths and why they're false. Myth number 1, carrying a balance is good for your credit scores. No, in fact, quite the opposite. NerdWallet does not recommend carrying a balance month to month if you can avoid it. But 46% of Americans actually believe that carrying a balance is good for your credit scores. The reason why it's not comes down to something called your credit utilization ratio. Basically, the lower your credit utilization ratio, the more likely you are to have higher credit scores. Credit utilization is simply the amount of outstanding balance that you have relative to your overall credit limit. So let's say that your overall credit limit is $10,000. If you have a balance of, say, $3,000 in credit card debt, then your credit utilization ratio would be 30%. Now, experts recommend that your credit utilization ratio actually never exceed 30%, but lower is better. If you can have a credit utilization ratio of, let's say, 1 or 2%, that's even better. It basically looks like you're not spending more than how much the bank is able to loan you. There's another reason why carrying a balance is not great, and that's because of interest. Any outstanding balance you have beyond that billing cycle is now going to start accruing interest. So if you only make a partial payment on your credit card, then you'll be paying interest on whatever is left. If you don't want to pay that interest, which you don't because that's money going to the bank and not in your wallet, then pay off that bill in full. Of course, emergencies come up and you won't be able to pay your credit card bill in full every month, every time, but if you can, pay it down. Credit cards are an amazing way to build credit because if you do pay off your cards in full every month, you won't owe any money in interest. That's opposed to other credit building tools like mortgage payments or student loans, where you're always going to owe interest on those things. With a credit card, if you pay it in full every month, you won't owe interest. So, if you really want to build up those credit scores and avoid paying money in interest, don't follow what everyone else wrongly believes, but pay off your bill in full or as close to full as possible every month. Number 2, closing a credit card you don't use is good for your credit. Nearly half of Americans in NerdWallet's survey, that's 46% to be exact, actually believed this. But you shouldn't necessarily close credit cards that you don't use, and that's for a few reasons. The first is I want to go back to that credit utilization ratio we talked about earlier. Basically, closing a credit card means that you reduce that available amount of credit, which can then in turn have a negative impact on your credit utilization ratio. Another reason why I recommend keeping old cards open is because of your length of credit history. According to Experian, your length of credit history accounts for about 15% of your overall credit scores. You might have a really old credit card you got in your early 20s that you're not using anymore, maybe because it doesn't have any sort of benefits, no high points earning to go for it, but there's a good reason to keep that old credit card open, and that's simply to extend your average credit age. Now, keep in mind, many credit card companies will close cards automatically that aren't otherwise used, but you want to keep that card open. So my piece of advice is to take some sort of small subscription, or if you have any other ongoing monthly payments that are relatively small, charge those to that older credit card account. That way you can keep that old credit card open, maintain that long credit history age. In that similar vein, I also do want to talk about this myth that having too many credit cards is bad. While certainly it's not great to have all these credit cards floating around that you're not using and losing track of and might be paying annual fees on, there's nothing wrong with having many credit cards. In fact, many responsible credit card users who have really high credit scores also have dozens or more of credit cards. Again, having more credit cards just means that you might have a higher overall amount of available credit, which can help with that credit utilization ratio. Not to mention, they might just be offering you benefits like travel insurance, elite status, points earning that can also help you in the long run. Number 3, a credit check won't impact your credit scores. That is a myth, but about 28% of Americans actually believe this. Now, there are 2 types of credit checks. There are soft inquiries and there are hard inquiries. Typically, a soft inquiry won't have negative impacts on your credit scores, but a hard inquiry would. That's done when you do something like apply for a new credit card. So if you are applying for a new credit card, realize that that's a hard inquiry and it can have a negative impact on your credit scores. Now, keep in mind, this is a short-term impact. It won't last for an extended period of time, but if you are applying for multiple credit cards, it's a good idea to do that in a short period of time so that it reduces that negative impact on your credit scores. As well as if you know that you need to apply for multiple loans, like you're applying for a mortgage and you've just applied for a credit card not long before, realize that that credit card application initiated a hard inquiry, which can then have a negative impact on your credit scores, which then can result in probably a less desirable mortgage interest rate. Ultimately, the biggest factor in your credit scores is payment history. Make those payments on time, at least the minimum payment, but if you can make those payments in full, that's even better. Of course, emergencies happen and you might not be able to pay your credit card in full every month, but the best way to build up that positive credit history is making those payments in full on time every month. I'm Sally French, a travel and credit cards writer at NerdWallet. My oldest credit card just entered double digits. It's 10 years old now. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe.